Welcome to the Mason Duchatschek Show. This episode is brought to you by Workforce Alchemy, helping leaders improve hiring, engagement, and retention while uncovering people-related profit leaks hidden in everyday operations. Today's guest is John Dario, a seasoned executive, leadership advisor, and author of AIM, How Managers Get Radically Reliable Results. John has spent more than 30 years leading and advising teams at organizations like Macy's, Gap, and Bank of America, helping leaders turn strategy into consistent execution. His work centers on one critical question most organizations struggle with. How do you get people to do what they're going to do every time? But John, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Mason. I'm very glad to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
So you've been inside some very large organizations. Can you take us inside a moment when a leadership team thought things were under control, but you could see cracks forming before results showed it?
Geez, I could spend 3 hours telling you about those types of situations in, some of these large companies, whether it's Macy's or Gap or Bank of America or Travelex. It happens all the time. Leaders communicate a vision or communicate direction, and it just doesn't translate to the front lines. And I can remember one very, very specific example from my Gap days when the CEO visited my store, and it was the first time he had been in stores since a new product line had rolled out, a new season product line, and he saw it in the store and was shocked. It had been a huge investment from the buying line, and it was exactly opposite of what he was expecting. He had been in Milan and he had given direction to the buying team to make an investment in garment dyed knit programs for the women's season. And as it turns out, they did so, but they did it in pastel colors, and he was expecting it to be in bright colors. And it was a complete disaster. And it was a perfect example of how an extremely talented CEO and merchant ended up with a result in the front lines that wasn't what he anticipated, simply because communication broke down somewhere along the way.
What happened next?
I wasn't privy to some of the conversations that happened back in San Francisco. I'm guessing some of those conversations weren't very pleasant, but I mean, the actual next was that a lot of that stuff got marked down, and the company ended up losing some money on that particular program. But I guess the reality is that a lesson was learned by all, that there had to be more questions asked, more confirmations made, and I'm not aware of that mistake getting repeated exactly the same way.
Early in your career, what was a leadership failure or near miss that permanently changed how you think about follow through?
Yeah, great question. A story that is permanently ingrained in my mind. I was running a small regional sporting goods store. I had run a couple of other stores and had done very well. They were much smaller stores, and I was working my butt off hours every day, and I was doing it all myself. And I got promoted to a larger store, and the pieces weren't coming together quite the same way. I had a little routine where I walked every department manager's department on Mondays, and we made a list of everything that had to be done by Friday for the weekend business. And I'd walk every Friday, and stuff wasn't done, and I was getting very upset, and I couldn't understand it. And everybody, all six department supervisors, had what sounded like legitimate excuses, but I really wasn't buying it. And so I decided that I walked their departments on Monday morning, and I came out right after the lunch rush Tuesday or Monday at 2 o'clock, walked again, and nobody had anything done. And I was mad. So I did the same thing on Tuesday, 2 o'clock. No, nobody had anything done. And Wednesday I walk at 2 o'clock, and the first couple of departments, nobody had anything done. And I was in a horrible mood. And then I see Regina coming prancing toward me. Regina was the department supervisor in charge of the fashion department. And she's got a big smile on her face. And you guessed it, every single thing on her list was done perfectly. And I just looked at her. I'm like, I had tears in my eyes. I was so happy. And I said, Regina, what happened? And she said, John, you came out on Monday at 2 o'clock. I didn't have anything done. You came out Tuesday at 2 o'clock. I didn't have anything done. I figure you're probably going to come out Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and I didn't want to disappoint you. And the message to me was, Regina wanted to be successful. And as it turns out, all the department supervisors wanted to be successful. They just needed me to be there with them. They needed me to be there to, first of all, to motivate them to get it done. They had to know what was important to me, and by spending my time following up and relentlessly following up, I demonstrated what was important to them. But they also needed my help in removing some obstacles and so on to help them be successful. They were facing obstacles, including customer traffic and everything else, and that to me was the turning point in terms of how I viewed my role and how I viewed follow up and how critical follow up is to helping the team succeed.
So when you walk into a business for the first time, what's one subtle sign that tells you that executions can be a problem even before anyone says it out loud?
Um, I mean, first of all, you can generally see it in the kind of the activity of the people, and you can also see it in the language that's being used or not being used. I think generally an organization that is achieving success in a consistent and reliable way is operating off of a very clear set of action lists. They have an action list in hand all the time, in hand, if it's on paper or on an electronic device or whatever, but everybody knows what they're working on and what the priorities are. And in an organization, if you people aren't clear on what their priorities are, or aren't clear on exactly what their mission for the day or for the hour or for the week is, then that's a recipe for to build sustainable results.
For those who are listening, you dropped some very important bits of information. And you talked about what I've heard you say just so far is that you
You
inspected what you
expected what you
expect. You went out and checked, and not just once, but again.
correct?
And two, you had checklists and things that were clearly needed to be done in order. And that makes me reflect on a time was a brand new second lieutenant in the Missouri Army National Guard right out of college. And my job was a platoon leader. And we had this thing called PMCS, Preventive Maintenance and Check Systems or whatever. Ultimately, I was responsible to make sure that our vehicles were battle ready. And we had a maintenance schedule, as you say, a checklist that needed to be performed every drill. Some things were checked every month, things were checked once a quarter, some things were checked every year, but there was this list of exactly what to do in what order it needed to be done. My the training that I received in college, the ROTC said you have to inspect what you expect and lead by example and all those other things. So I wasn't afraid to crawl under a vehicle and go to, if there's 20 different points on a checklist, I would crawl under and maybe go to 13 and 17.6 and post a little
Right?
post note under there saying, hey, when you get this note, bring it back to lieutenant. And then I would simply go and I would ask the platoon sergeant if PMCS had been done on the vehicles, and he'd say, let me check, let me check. And of course, he would ask the squad leader asked the team leader would ask the private who was supposed to do it, did he do it? And when I got to, yeah, it's all been taken care of, my question to the platoon sergeant would be, are you sure?
Yep.
And he'd be, and of course, then he would raise his eyebrows and, what do you mean? I said, just go ask squad leader if he's got anything for me. And if the answer was no, then I would have the platoon sergeant perform PMCS and say, Sergeant, I think you need to show these guys exactly how it needs to be done. And when the platoon sergeant walked them through, which was not his job, it was then he found the notes and he automatically knew, hey, it had been not been done. And that's why he was doing it. So I'll give you one guess how many times my platoon sergeant had to perform PMCS on a vehicle and do a private's job.
Not
After
many.
that moment, 0. And it wasn't like I was being a jerk about it. It was, hey, this is a responsibility and I'm going to check it. I'm going to follow up. And you need to make sure that when I ask you a question, that you've done your work and if the answer is no, then it's okay. But this, the, just like you walked around and checked, that was my way of doing the same thing. And I did have a list and there wasn't animosity and it wasn't like I was being disrespectful. I'm just like, look, I'm responsible. And if you say something's done, I need to know that it is. And this is my means of checking. And that sent a message to the rest of the guys. Don't lie to the lieutenant. He's going to check.
I love that story. I think it's a proactive way of following up, actually, which is kind of an oxymoron, I guess, but it's a brilliant solution to a common problem of getting teams to execute every step of the process.
Well, and in leadership terms, it showed them that I wasn't afraid to crawl under a machine and get greasy and dirty either.
Sure.
And I
Sure.
would never ask anything of them that I wouldn't do myself.
Makes sense.
So, can you share a story of a team that maybe talked a great game in meetings, but nothing really changed afterward? What was really happening beneath the surface, in your opinion?
Um, yeah, I've got a funny story from my Bank of America days. I had, we had a routine where there were regular communications that came from headquarters, and from the zone offices, and we had a process whereby those communications were printed out and put in a binder, a communications binder, and every employee of the branch every day when they reported for their shift had to go and read the communications in the binder before they started working. And that was essentially the way to get them to be on top of what the newest communications were. I had a particular branch that was consistently not on top of the new product knowledge, or they were not executing the new operational directions. And so I began to question whether they were executing that communications binder system properly. And of course, the management team, absolutely, we are. We have it. Every communication is in the binder. Everybody's reading it. And in fact, they implemented a system whereby they had the employees sign the top of the memo in the binder to show that they had read it. And so I visited the branch one day, and I watched a couple of employees reporting for their shift. I watched them go to the binder. I watched them and write their initials on the top of the page. And then as soon as they walked away from the binder, I asked them what they had just read, and neither one of them had any clue what they had just read. They were just pencil whipping the process, and they weren't actually absorbing the information. It kind of taught me one thing, is that people, not out of a desire to be bad, but just out of a desire of habit and a lack of real consistent follow up, will take the path of least resistance. And the way to solve that is to actually have real live interactions with people. It's easy for people to pencil whip things when it's pencil and paper. It's not so easy to pencil whip it when you have to have a live eyeball to eyeball conversation.
It's funny because I was sitting there thinking, I'd probably, if I didn't think they were doing it, I probably would have just put a special note and said, "Hey, go tell your manager the score of the football game today," just to have that in there to see if they read it. And hey, did your employee have
That's a good
anything for
idea.
you
Yeah.
today?
Yeah.
So similar
Yeah.
style. You said that consistency matters more than intensity. Can you expound on that?
So there's a little story in a book called The Slight Edge, which is a great book, by the way, but it talks about the formation of the Grand Canyon, and the fact that the Grand Canyon wasn't created by some huge event, meteorite or anything like that. It was just a stream of water over millions of years that dug a hole in the ground and created one of the most incredible, an incredible wonder of the world. And I believe that in a lot of businesses, we as leaders sometimes look for the big splash or the big win, and sometimes those big wins can be beneficial. But the reality is, a big win kind of delivers one win, right? It delivers one benefit for some short period of time, but the sustained progress over time, sustained delivery of repeatable results. And I come from the world of retail, where you're only as good as your last customer, and you have to repeat the performance customer after customer, day after day, year after year, in order to grow. There's a retail giant, Edward Filene, who founded Filene's department stores, and he also was instrumental in the founding of the credit union industry. He defined progress as the continual replacement of the best there is with something even better. And in my mind, it's just because you're always striving to be a tiny bit better than you were yesterday doesn't mean you're bad. You can be the greatest in the world. You just have to keep growing. And the only way to do that is to build upon success, and build something sustainable that's not, a roller coaster of good and bad.
So, what's the best metaphor you found for helping leaders understand why things fall apart between planning and doing?
Yeah, I love to use the metaphor of a GPS. A GPS in a car, when you start the GPS, the first thing you do is you put in your desired destination. And the machine then calculates the driving directions to get to that destination. But the driving directions are only as good as the accuracy of the destination. If you put in a wrong destination, or you put in a too generic destination, the calculation of the driving steps aren't going to get you there. And I think the same thing holds true in leadership and management environments. If you're very good as a leader about defining exactly what the end result you intend to get to is, then you and the team can build the action steps that will help you get to that particular result. But if you are somehow unclear or are incomplete in communicating what the result is, chances are pretty good that the action steps that you and the team are going to build are not going to get you to the same place.
Have you ever seen a leader unintentionally train their team not to follow through?
Hmm. That's a great question. Yeah. I think, look, I guess a great example in my world of retail is that retail managers have a tendency to focus on following up on operational stuff, not so much on customer interactions. In the retail world, customer interactions are critically important, right? But we tend to just accept that salespeople and employees are interacting with customers in some reasonable way, and it's uncomfortable. It's a gray area, and it's not as easy to follow up on sales interactions as it is on an operational detail, like did you fill in the blue shirts on the front table. And so salespeople kind of get used to not receiving much follow up from managers on their interactions with customers. And the really, some managers who are typically seen as really good might do a might make time to do an inspection observation of employees with customers once or twice a day and think that they're doing something really great by providing feedback on those customer interactions, when in fact the salespeople are interacting with hundreds of customers in a day, and the one or two times they get a little bit of feedback is 1 or 2% or worse of the actual occurrences. So they're kind of training the salespeople to expect that 98 or 99% of the time to get they're not going to receive any follow up on their customer interactions, and that's a problem.
Well, that's a great example. And I literally just thought of if you hadn't gone and asked those people who were supposedly reading the binder, hey, what'd you learn from the reading, air quotes for those who are listening and not watching, reading the thing. When you notice that they didn't do it and you would have not followed through on that, that would have been teaching them that this isn't important. It's not a priority.
Agreed. Agreed. I think we do it all the time. Every time we don't follow up and allow performance to be something less than what we intended, we're reinforcing that. We're reinforcing that.
So the other side of that coin is, how do great leaders make expectations unmistakably clear without turning into micromanagers?
Yeah, that's that micromanagement word is I'm afraid used a little too loosely and interpreted a little too viciously. I think that micromanagement, when you're on people in a way that is I guess counterproductive, or in a way that is disrespectful, or in a way that is somewhat overbearing to people's real abilities, then it's a management problem for sure. But I think managers get so scared of being labeled a micromanager that they end up leaving people on their own too much. I have a model that I call the leadership balance model, and it's kind of a different way of looking at the traditional linear model of management. Typically, we think of managers as being kind of easy managers or hard managers, and it's this linear progression. On the one hand, you've got a manager who hands off, lets people do their thing, and on the other end of the spectrum, you've got the manager who's on top of everybody all the time. I don't think it works like that. I think you can do two things at the same time. You can have people feel confident about what they're doing, and at the same time, you can still challenge them to do more. So I see it as more like a 2 by 2 grid with those two things on opposite sides. You've got the level of confidence that you instill in people, and the level of challenge you instill in them. And when people are feeling both confident and challenged, that's when I think they perform at their best. And you can do that with some fairly simple messaging. You can use a little formula that kind of says, Mason, I really see how great you're doing with that particular task, and you've really gotten very good at it. I'm thrilled with the progress you've made, and I'm going to challenge you to step it up a notch and now try A, B, and C, and maybe you can grow even more in that particular skill. And I mean, that's obviously a rough way to say it, but or a very easy way to say it, but in that formula, you're doing both things at the same time, and I think that's when people really perform their best, and you won't be perceived as a micromanager if you're letting people feel that element of confidence in the results that they're getting.
So I know you've worked across very different industries. What execution mistake shows up everywhere, regardless of size or sector?
Yeah, I think that managers believing that they have given employees every bit of information they need, or employees are adequately trained to do whatever the task is, I think is a mistake that I've seen across every industry I've been a part of. We want to believe that people know what they're doing, and we want to do our own things too. Managers are very busy people, and but when you make the assumption that somebody knows what they're doing and knows how to achieve the result, and you don't actually have a two-way conversation with them where you're asking them to validate, or when you haven't seen them perform the skill or perform the task yourself in the past, you're setting both of yourselves, you and as the manager and the employee, up for some failure.
Can you tell a story where improving execution actually changed the culture of a team, not just the numbers?
Sure. Um, I'll talk about my days in the foreign. I was in the retail foreign currency business where we had locations in airports, and the product was currency, so it wasn't like it was sitting out on a shelf, right? It was in a locked drawer, and the whole point of the way to sell foreign currency was to have the right currency for the flights that were departing from the gates near the store location. So if the store was on a terminal where there was a flight to London and a flight to Paris, you needed to make sure you had British pounds and euros in the till, enough of them to serve the passengers on those departing flights. And I was regularly having a problem with stores not having enough of the right currencies in the tills. So we went through an exercise where we defined a process, and we created a common language. The process was that the location manager had to go to the flight display monitor and map out all the flights for the day, so they knew exactly what flights were what destinations were near their store, and we called that flight mapping. So flight mapping became a process. Then the second part of this process was to do a calculation based on the flights that were going. How much in US dollar value of the currency did we need? And that was based on an estimate of the number of passengers and the typical conversion rate of passengers on the flights. And then the third step was to print what we called an F9 report, because you couldn't see the currency. Like I said, it wasn't on shelves. You had to print an F9 report from the cash register till in order to see what was in the till. So those three steps: flight mapping, the currency calculation, and the F9 report, became a common language. This started in one airport, and it became so successful in one airport. We rolled the process out to the rest of the airports throughout North America, and it became an absolute culture. The F9 report was flight mapping, and the F9 report were just common. They were part of the common language that every single person in the organization began to use, and it's just part of the job. And to your point, obviously it impacted sales. We had positive impacts on revenue, but it also just became so habitual and so routine that it was just the way we spoke every day.
So when leaders say my people are capable, they just don't take ownership. In your opinion, what's usually the deeper issue?
I'll repeat something I said a couple of minutes ago. I think sometimes leaders they think they're going to get some prize for not being a micromanager. They're going to get somebody's going to pat them on the back for empowering their people. And I think that that's elevating that particular prize above the reality of getting results. And I think that's sometimes at the heart of it. And sometimes I think it's just bad prioritization and time management on the part of the leader. I've been in a lot of different management positions, And I've never been in a position where I felt like I had enough time to do everything. And so managers often choose to do the things that are their individual responsibilities. Many times it's things that other people on the team can't do for a number of reasons. And their day ends up getting filled with all of those types of tasks, and they never get around to managing. And they rationalize it by saying my people are really good and I empower them, when in fact it's a choice, a conscious choice they've made to spend their time doing tasks rather than actually providing leadership. And I think that's an error in judgment.
So I know that you have a lot of experience and a lot of insights and a lot of wisdom. Obviously, most of it put in your book, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But if there was only one piece of advice that you could offer a business owner, executive, or manager, what would that piece of advice be and why?
Yeah. I would say live by a simple equation. The equation is actions plus external influences equals results. And in my mind, there is no greater truth to organizational results. There's only two things that impact the results you get. It's the actions you take and the external influences that go into it. And if you understand, can predict the external influences and the magnitude of those external influences, then you should be able to build the actions that are necessary in order to deliver the results that you want. If you somehow put your head in the sand and think that your actions aren't the main thing that you can control and the main thing that's going to deliver results, then you're taking your eye off the ball. So don't get so caught up, understand the external influences, but don't get so caught up in them that you lose focus on what you and your team really control, and build your entire organizational culture around action items and executing those action items. And if you do that, then other pieces will fall into place pretty quickly.
I love it. So if people want to know more about you, the work you do, what's the best way for them to connect with you and learn more?
Sure. My website is johndario.com. Easy to find. No H in the John, so it's jondario.com. Anybody can go there. They'll get a good view of what I do, and how I might be able to help their organizations. There's a contact form there if they wanna talk live with me. I'm happy to communicate with them.
Why don't you tell us a little about your book? What
Yeah.
inspired that?
Sure, thanks. I have so this is actually book number 5 for me, and I started writing them several years ago. I was encouraged to do so by a coworker, somebody I had worked with for years, and she suggested I start to share all the stories that she had been sick of hearing about. She said, "Stop telling me the stories, put them in a book." So I did, and I just kind of never stopped. It's kind of my way. I've worked in some great organizations. I've worked for great people, and I've learned a lot of things along the way, and I just really like to share the stuff, and it's been quite a hobby.
Awesome. And I'm assuming all available on Amazon or at your
All
website?
available on Amazon. It's not quite available. We're getting ready to publish third week of March, and it'll be available Amazon. It'll be Kindle version, Audible version, the whole bit.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, John.
No, thank you, Mason. Great conversation.